The Apache helicopter sat motionless on the tarmac at Forward Operating Base Seraph, its rotor blades casting long shadows in the pre-dawn darkness of the Afghan desert. Staff Sergeant Kai Wrench Nakamura crouched beside the aircraft's starboard weapons pylon, her weathered hands working methodically through the minigun's feed mechanism. The M230 chain gun had jammed during yesterday's patrol, and now, with a priority escort mission launching in 40 minutes, she was the only thing standing between operational readiness and a delayed departure that could cost lives. "Jesus, Nakamura, you've been at that thing for 3 hours," called out Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Donovan from the cockpit, his voice carrying the familiar edge of a pilot who'd rather be airborne than grounded. "Maybe we should call it and use the backup bird." Kai didn't look up from her work. Her fingers, stained with hydraulic fluid and gunpowder residue, continued their precise dance through the weapon's internals. "Backup bird's got a cracked rotor hub," she replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that weighed on her shoulders like a lead blanket. "This baby's our only ride today." The problem wasn't just mechanical. It never was, not really. The jamming pattern suggested something more complex, something that had been building for weeks. The brass casings were showing stress fractures in unusual places, the belt feed was wearing asymmetrically, and the barrel assembly had developed a microscopic wobble that most technicians would miss entirely. But Kai wasn't most technicians. 35 minutes, Wrench, Donovan pressed, using the call sign that had followed her through 3 deployments and 2 different aircraft types. "Command's breathing down my neck about this convoy escort. We've got VIPs moving through the valley, and intelligence suggests—" "Intelligence suggests a lot of things," Kai interrupted, finally lifting her head to meet his gaze through the cockpit glass. "Most of them wrong." That's when she saw it. A hairline crack in the ammunition feed cover, so subtle it was almost invisible in the dim maintenance lighting. But it was there, and it explained everything. The crack was causing intermittent pressure variations that were throwing off the feed timing by milliseconds, enough to cause random jams, but not enough to trigger the diagnostic systems. As she reached for her precision tools, the motion pulled her sleeve back slightly, revealing the edge of a tattoo on her left wrist. It was barely visible in the shadows, just a hint of ink that caught the light for a fraction of a second. Donovan's eyes narrowed as he tried to make out the design, but Kai had already pulled her sleeve back down, her attention returned to the weapon system. The desert wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of dust and diesel fuel, and somewhere in the distance, another helicopter's rotors began to turn. Donovan had been flying Apache for 8 years, through 2 tours in Iraq and now this endless rotation in Afghanistan. He'd worked with dozens of crew chiefs and weapons technicians, but something about Nakamura was different. She approached each aircraft like she was reading its soul, understanding not just the mechanics but the subtle personality of each machine. Other techs fixed problems. Kai prevented them. "Talk to me, Wrench," he said, sliding down from the cockpit to crouch beside her. "What are you seeing?" Her hands never paused in their work as she spoke. Feed covers compromised. Microfracture propagated along the stress line, probably started about 200 flight hours ago. Been getting worse with each mission cycle. She pulled a thin metal shim from her toolkit, measuring the gap with the precision of a surgeon. "Command's been pushing these birds hard, too hard. Metal fatigue setting in across the fleet, but nobody wants to hear about maintenance schedules when there's a war to fight." Donovan watched her work, noting the economy of her movements, the way she seemed to anticipate each step before taking it. Most technicians worked through procedures. Kai worked through instinct. "How long to fix it?" 20 minutes if I do it right, 5 minutes if I do it fast." She looked up at him, and in the maintenance lighting her dark eyes held the weight of too many compromised repairs, too many shortcuts taken under pressure. "Which do you want?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. In the distance, The operations center's radio crackled to life with morning briefings and weather updates. The base was waking up, and with it came the relentless machinery of military operations that would demand their Apache be mission-ready regardless of the consequences. Donovan checked his watch again. 28 minutes until wheels up. The convoy they were supposed to escort was already moving into position, and the intelligence reports suggested increased enemy activity along the route. Delaying the mission wasn't just about disappointing command. It was about leaving fellow soldiers exposed when they needed air support most. But he'd also learned to trust his crew chief's instincts. In combat, the difference between a quick fix and a proper repair could mean the difference between coming home and becoming a casualty statistic. "Do it right," he said finally. "I'll handle command." Something shifted in Kai's expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. She nodded once and returned to her work, but now there was a different energy in her movements, a confidence that came from knowing she had the support to do her job properly. As she worked, Donovan found himself studying the barely visible edge of that tattoo on her wrist. There was something familiar about it, something that nagged at the edges of his memory. The radio inside the cockpit chirped with an incoming transmission from operations, but Donovan ignored it, watching instead as his crew chief performed surgery on their aircraft with the skill of someone who understood that lives depended on every component functioning exactly as designed. Kai's tool selection was methodical but swift: precision drill bits, specialized alignment gauges, replacement components that she'd somehow anticipated needing. She worked in layers, addressing not just the immediate problem but the underlying stress patterns that had caused it. This wasn't just maintenance. It was preventive medicine for a machine of war. "You know," Donovan said, settling into a more comfortable position beside the aircraft, "I've been wondering about something." "Yeah," Kai's voice was distracted, focused on threading a new feed mechanism into place. "Your call sign, wrench. Most maintenance folks get called wrench because it's obvious, but you carry yourself different, like there's a story there." Her hand stilled for just a moment, so briefly that most people would have missed it. But Donovan had learned to read the subtle signs of people carrying weight they didn't talk about. Combat did that to soldiers. It left marks that went deeper than scars. "Everyone's got a story," she said finally, resuming her work. "Most of them aren't worth telling." The deflection was smooth, practiced, but it only made Donovan more curious. In the growing dawn light, he caught another glimpse of her tattoo as she reached for a different tool. The design was becoming clearer now, definitely military but not standard issue, something more specialized. 22 minutes, called out another voice from across the tarmac. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was approaching with his characteristic quick stride, tablet in hand, and the expression of a man who had too many problems and not enough solutions. "Status report, Chief." Donovan stood to intercept him, knowing that direct command pressure was the last thing Kai needed right now. "Feed mechanism replacement, sir. Crew Chief Nakamura identified a structural flaw that could have resulted in critical failure during the mission." Harrison's eyes narrowed as he processed this information. "How long?" 15 minutes for proper completion, sir." "The convoy's already moving. Every minute we delay puts more soldiers at risk." Harrison's voice carried the weight of command decisions, the terrible mathematics of warfare where every choice carried potential casualties. "Can she get it operational faster?" "She could, sir, but—" "No buts, Chief. We need that bird in the air." Harrison turned toward Kai, who was still working beneath the aircraft. "Sergeant Nakamura, I need an honest assessment. Can you get this bird mission ready in the next 10 minutes? Kai slid out from under the Apache, her uniform stained with hydraulic fluid and metal shavings. She stood slowly, meeting Harrison's gaze with the steady composure that had earned her respect throughout the maintenance battalion. The morning sun had risen enough to cast real shadows now, and in the clearer light, Her tattoo was partially visible, a trident design that made Donovan's breath catch in his throat. 20 years ago, Marcus Donovan had been a young Navy pilot attached to a joint special operations task force. He remembered the insignia, remembered the men and women who wore it, remembered the operations that were never officially acknowledged. The seal trident was unmistakable, even partially obscured by fabric and shadow. But women hadn't been officially allowed in SEAL teams 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, or even 10 years ago, despite the fact that everyone in special operations knew there were female operators working in gray areas, in programs that existed in the spaces between official policy and operational necessity. Kai was studying Harrison's face with the same methodical precision she applied to mechanical problems. "I can have it operational in 10 minutes, sir, but the repair won't hold under sustained fire. First extended engagement, and you'll lose the minigun entirely, maybe permanently. And with the full repair will last through anything you can throw at it, maybe longer." She wiped her hands on a rag, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Your call, sir." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, weighing options that had no good answers. In the distance, radio chatter indicated that the convoy was taking longer than expected to clear the base perimeter, mechanical problems with one of the lead vehicles. A few precious minutes reprieve, but not enough to change the fundamental equation. "The convoy's having issues anyway," Donovan said quietly. "Maybe we've got a little more time than we thought." Harrison's radio crackled with an update from operations. Convoy departure delayed 15 minutes due to communication equipment failure. The lieutenant colonel's expression shifted slightly, the pressure releasing just enough to allow for a different decision. "Do it right, Sergeant," he said finally. "We'll make up the time in the air." As Harrison walked away, Donovan found himself alone again with Kai, watching her slide back under the aircraft to continue her work. But now he was seeing her differently, processing the implications of what he'd glimpsed on her wrist. "So," he said casually, "that tattoo, military." "Something like that." Her voice was muffled by the aircraft's structure, but he could hear the careful neutrality in her tone. The trident design was becoming clearer in his memory now, not just the basic SEAL insignia, but something more specific. A variation he'd seen only once before, on the wrist of a female operator whose name he'd never learned, whose existence had been officially denied even as she'd saved his life during a mission that never happened in a country where they'd never been. The pieces were starting to fit together in ways that changed everything he thought he knew about his crew chief. Kai emerged from beneath the Apache 15 minutes later, her work complete. The replacement feed mechanism was installed with the precision of a Swiss watch, calibrated and tested through multiple dry cycles. She'd also taken the opportunity to address 3 other minor issues that could have become major problems in the coming weeks: worn seals, alignment drift, and metal fatigue in the ammunition storage system. "System checks green across the board," she announced, wiping her hands one final time. "She'll eat whatever you feed her and ask for more." Donovan ran through the pre-flight checklist with renewed confidence, watching as each system responded exactly as designed. The minigun cycled smoothly through its test sequence, the ammunition feed operating with the mechanical precision of a weapon system that had been properly maintained by someone who understood its every component. "Outstanding work, Wrench," he said, and meant it. But as he spoke, his eyes drifted again to her wrist, where the tattoo was now clearly visible in the full daylight. It wasn't just a SEAL trident. It was a specialized variant that indicated membership in one of the most classified units in the military, a program so black that its very existence was compartmentalized beyond top secret. A program that had officially never recruited women, despite the fact that female operators had been essential to its most sensitive missions for over a decade. Kai caught him looking and pulled her sleeve down with a motion so casual it might have been unconscious. But her eyes met his for just a moment, and in that brief contact, he saw a flicker of something that might have been assessment. She was measuring him, deciding whether he was a threat or simply curious. "Pre-flight's complete," she said, changing the subject with the smooth efficiency of someone accustomed to deflecting questions. "You're good to go whenever command gives the word." The radio crackled with an update. "Convoy ready for departure. Apache escort requested for immediate launch." The morning's mission was about to begin, but for Donovan, everything had changed. He was no longer just flying with a highly skilled crew chief. He was flying with someone whose background suggested capabilities far beyond aircraft maintenance. As they prepared for takeoff, he found himself wondering what other secrets Kai Nakamura was carrying, and what circumstances had led a decorated special operations veteran to become a helicopter crew chief in Afghanistan. The story behind her call sign was starting to make a lot more sense, but it was also raising questions that might be dangerous to ask. The Apache's turbines spooled up with their characteristic whine, and the aircraft lifted off into the Afghan morning sky. Below them, the convoy began its movement through the valley, a column of armored vehicles threading their way between ancient mountains that had witnessed countless battles across centuries of conflict. But as they climbed toward their patrol altitude, Donovan couldn't shake the feeling that he was flying with someone whose story was far more complex than anyone realized. The tattoo on Kai's wrist wasn't just ink and skin. It was a symbol of service so classified that acknowledging its existence could end careers and compromise operations that were still ongoing. The mission proceeded normally for the first hour. The convoy made good time through the initial waypoints, and the Apache maintained overwatch from altitude, Donovan's experienced eyes scanning the terrain for potential threats, while Kai monitored the aircraft systems and maintained communication with ground elements. "Convoy 6, this is Apache 2-1. We have you visual at Checkpoint Alpha," Donovan transmitted over the radio. "Route appears clear to Checkpoint Bravo. Recommend maintaining current speed and formation." "Copy, Apache 2-1. Appreciate the overwatch," came the reply from the convoy commander, his voice steady despite the inherent tension of moving through hostile territory. Kai was performing her crew chief duties with the same methodical precision she'd shown during maintenance, monitoring engine parameters, tracking ammunition status, maintaining situational awareness of threats and friendly positions. But Donovan was beginning to notice subtleties in her performance that suggested training far beyond standard crew chief school. Her threat assessment was too sophisticated, her tactical awareness too advanced. When she called out potential sniper positions or suggested altitude adjustments for better observation angles, she wasn't just following procedures. She was thinking like someone who had operated on the ground in these same kinds of environments. "Movement 2 o'clock, approximately 800 meters. Kai's voice was calm and professional over the intercom. "Single individual observing convoy from concealed position behind rock outcropping." Donovan adjusted their flight path for a better view, bringing the Apache's sensors to bear on the position she'd identified. Through the thermal imaging system, he could see the heat signature of a prone figure with what appeared to be optical equipment. "Good eye," he said, "spotter." "Possible. Recommend we mark the position and continue monitoring. If he's alone, he's probably just observing. If there are others." She didn't need to finish the thought. A single observer was concerning but manageable. A coordinated observation post suggested the possibility of an ambush, and that changed everything about their tactical situation. The figure remained in position for several minutes, tracking the convoy's movement with his optics but making no aggressive moves. Eventually, as the vehicles moved beyond effective engagement range, the observer withdrew from his position and disappeared into the rocky terrain. "Textbook behavior for a tactical reconnaissance element," Kai observed quietly. her analysis delivered with the casual precision of someone who had both conducted and defended against such operations. Donovan found himself increasingly convinced that his crew chief's background was far more complex than her official record suggested. 30 minutes later, the convoy reached Checkpoint Bravo without incident, and Donovan was beginning to think the mission might proceed without contact. The Taliban had been relatively quiet in this sector for the past week, and intelligence reports suggested that most enemy forces had moved north toward a different area of operations. Then Kai's voice cut through his complacency with the sharp edge of someone who had learned to trust her instincts. Apache 2-1, I'm seeing dust signatures consistent with vehicle movement, bearing 090, approximately 12 kilometers from convoy position. Donovan immediately adjusted their sensors toward the indicated bearing, but initially saw nothing unusual. The terrain in that direction was rough and broken, with numerous valleys and ridgelines that could conceal movement from aerial observation. I'm not getting anything on thermal or optical, he said, but there was no skepticism in his voice. Crew chiefs who flew combat missions developed an almost supernatural ability to detect threats, and Kai had already proven herself unusually capable. There, she said, and suddenly he saw it, a brief reflection of sunlight off metal, gone almost as quickly as it had appeared. 4 vehicles, moving parallel to convoy route, staying in defilade behind the ridgeline. The tactical situation had just become significantly more complex. A vehicle-mounted enemy force in that position could execute a classic L-shaped ambush, hitting the convoy from the flank while maintaining cover from aerial attack. The timing of their movement suggested coordination with the observer they'd spotted earlier. Convoy 6, Apache 2-1, Donovan transmitted immediately. Be advised, we have possible hostile vehicle movement on your eastern flank, approximately 12 kilometers your position. Recommend increased vigilance and preparation for contact. Copy, Apache 2-1. We're tracking elevated threat indicators as well. Can you get us better information on hostile strength and intentions? Donovan was already adjusting their flight path for a reconnaissance run, but Kai's voice stopped him. Negative on direct overflight. If they're positioned for ambush, showing ourselves gives them time to reposition or abort. Recommend we maintain standoff distance and use sensors for assessment. Her tactical thinking was sophisticated enough that Donovan found himself deferring to her judgment without conscious thought. The next 20 minutes revealed the true complexity of the situation they faced. Using the Apache's advanced sensor suite, they identified not 4 but 6 enemy vehicles, along with dismounted personnel who had established firing positions along the convoy's planned route. The enemy force was larger and better organized than initial reports had suggested, and they had positioned themselves with the tactical sophistication of experienced fighters. This isn't opportunistic harassment, Kai observed, her analysis delivered with the clinical precision of a professional warrior. This is a coordinated ambush by personnel with advanced training. Vehicle positioning, personnel placement, timing, everything suggests they've been planning this for days, possibly weeks. Donovan felt a chill of recognition. The tactical setup was too professional for typical Taliban operations, suggesting the involvement of foreign advisors or possibly former military personnel. The kind of threat that could devastate an unprepared convoy. Options? He asked, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether they could prevent a massacre or simply witness one. Kai was quiet for a moment, and Donovan could almost hear her mental calculations. Enemy strength, friendly capabilities, terrain advantages, weapons ranges, civilian considerations. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions under pressure. We can break up their ambush with a show of force, but that just delays the inevitable. They'll reposition and hit the next convoy or the one after that. Her pause was barely perceptible. Or we can end this permanently. The implication was clear, and it raised questions about rules of engagement, proportional response, and the complex legal framework that governed military operations in Afghanistan. But it also reflected the stark reality that sometimes preventing future casualties required accepting present risks. "Talk to me," Donovan said, recognizing that his crew chief was proposing something beyond standard helicopter tactics. "Give me 60 seconds to walk you through what I'm seeing, then tell me if you think I'm wrong." For the next minute, Kai provided a tactical briefing that was more sophisticated than most he'd received from intelligence officers. She identified key terrain features, predicted enemy movement patterns, assessed likely command and control structures, and outlined vulnerabilities that could be exploited to neutralize the threat with minimal risk to friendly forces. Her analysis revealed not just military competence, but the kind of tactical thinking that came from extensive experience in direct action operations. This wasn't theoretical knowledge from training manuals. This was practical expertise gained through combat operations in similar environments. "Jesus Christ," Donovan said quietly when she finished. "Where did you learn to think like that?" "Same place you learned to fly," she replied. But her deflection couldn't hide the fact that she had just demonstrated capabilities far beyond her official military occupational specialty. The convoy was approaching the kill zone, and decisions had to be made immediately. Donovan could call for additional air support, but reinforcements were 20 minutes away, too long to prevent the initial attack. He could recommend that the convoy abort and return to base, but that would mean mission failure and the abandonment of whatever objectives had made this movement essential in the first place. Or he could trust his crew chief's assessment and take action based on her recommendations. "Apache 2-1, Convoy 6, the radio crackled with increasing urgency. "We're getting reports of possible IED emplacements along our route. Request immediate reconnaissance of Checkpoint Charlie vicinity." The enemy was accelerating their timeline, probably aware that they had been detected. The window for preventive action was closing rapidly. Donovan made his decision with the certainty of a pilot who had learned to trust his crew. "Tell me what you need." The attack began exactly as Kai had predicted. The convoy had just entered the narrowest part of the valley when the first rocket-propelled grenade impacted against the lead vehicle's armor plating. The explosion echoed off the surrounding mountains as small arms fire erupted from concealed positions on both sides of the route. "Contact, contact, contact." The convoy commander's voice burst through the radio static. "We're taking fire from multiple positions. Request immediate air support." Donovan was already maneuvering the Apache into attack position, but the enemy had chosen their ambush site with tactical sophistication. The rocky terrain provided cover from direct fire, while the convoy was channeled into a kill zone with limited options for maneuver or escape. "I count 12, 15 separate firing positions," Kai reported over the intercom, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting below them. "They've got the convoy bracketed with overlapping fields of fire." The sound of automatic weapons echoed through the valley as tracers crisscrossed between enemy positions and the convoy's defensive fire. Several vehicles had stopped entirely, their crews returning fire from behind armored doors and engine blocks. "Apache 2-1, we need immediate suppression of hostile positions on the eastern ridgeline," came the urgent request from ground forces. "We've got 2 vehicles immobilized and casualties mounting." But as Donovan began his attack run, Kai's voice cut through his focus with an observation that changed everything. "Check your 12 o'clock high. We've got additional movement." Donovan looked up through the aircraft's canopy and felt his blood turn cold. 3 aircraft were approaching from the north, helicopters, but not coalition forces. The silhouettes were wrong, the flight pattern too aggressive for friendly units. "Those aren't ours," he said quietly. No, Kai replied, her voice carrying a new edge of urgency. They're not. The tactical situation had just become exponentially more complex. What had begun as a ground ambush was evolving into a coordinated air-ground attack that suggested planning and resources far beyond typical insurgent capabilities. Convoy 6, Apache 2-1, be advised we have unidentified aircraft approaching from the north. Unknown hostile intent, but assume hostile until proven otherwise. Copy, Apache 2-1. We're taking heavy fire down here and need immediate support regardless of additional threats. Donovan found himself facing the kind of tactical dilemma that defined combat operations: multiple threats, insufficient resources, and decisions that would determine who lived and who died. The convoy needed immediate air support to survive the ground attack, but the approaching aircraft represented a threat that could destroy his Apache if he ignored them. Options? He asked his crew chief, recognizing that her tactical expertise might be their only advantage in an impossible situation. Kai was quiet for 10 seconds that felt like an eternity, processing variables and calculating probabilities with the speed of someone whose survival had once depended on making such assessments under pressure. The approaching aircraft are maintaining formation and altitude consistent with an attack profile, she said finally. But they're not maneuvering aggressively toward us. They're positioning for area denial, trying to prevent us from supporting the ground element. Her analysis suggested that the enemy aircraft were part of a larger tactical plan, designed to isolate the convoy from air support while ground forces completed their attack. It was a sophisticated strategy that required coordination between multiple enemy elements. Can we engage both threats simultaneously? Donovan asked, though he already knew the answer. Not effectively. We engage the aircraft, the convoy gets overrun. We support the convoy, the aircraft potentially engage us from a position of advantage. The radio crackled with increasingly desperate calls from the ground element. Apache 2-1, we need immediate fire support on grid coordinates. The transmission was interrupted by an explosion that suggested another direct hit on convoy vehicles. But Kai wasn't finished with her assessment. Unless what? Unless we change the tactical equation entirely. Her voice carried a tone that Donovan was beginning to recognize, the sound of someone accessing capabilities that went far beyond her official training. Whatever she was about to propose would reveal more about her background than she had ever intended to share. I need you to trust me for the next 5 minutes, she said quietly, and I need you to not ask questions about what you see me do. The intensity in her voice suggested that they were approaching a line that, once crossed, would change their relationship forever. But with friendly forces dying below them and enemy aircraft maneuvering for attack, philosophical concerns seemed less important than tactical necessities. What do you need? Donovan asked. Access to the communication system, all frequencies, including the encrypted channels. The request was unusual. Crew chiefs typically monitored communications, but rarely needed direct access to transmission capabilities. But something in Kai's tone suggested that she had specific reasons for the request that went beyond standard procedures. Done, Donovan said, transferring communication control to her station. What happened next would stay classified for the next 20 years, mentioned only in after-action reports that were immediately sealed and archived in facilities that officially didn't exist. But for the convoy trapped in the valley below, it was the difference between annihilation and survival. Kai's voice came over the radio, but she wasn't speaking English. The language was unfamiliar to Donovan, but the tone was unmistakably authoritative, someone issuing commands with the expectation of immediate compliance. The effect was immediate and startling. The 3 approaching aircraft suddenly broke formation, their aggressive approach pattern shifting to a defensive posture. Two of them began climbing rapidly to higher altitude, while the third initiated a wide turning pattern that took it away from the engagement area. "What the hell just happened?" Donovan asked, but Kai was already switching back to English and coordinating with the ground element. "Convoy 6, Apache 2-1, the aerial threat has been neutralized. We're moving to provide close air support for your current position." "Copy, Apache 2-1. How did you? Never mind. We need immediate suppression of enemy positions on bearing 085, approximately 600 meters from our lead element." For the next 15 minutes, Donovan and Kai worked together to systematically neutralize the ambush positions that had trapped the convoy. The Apache's weapons systems, properly maintained by Kai's earlier repairs, functioned flawlessly as they engaged enemy positions with precision fire that minimized collateral damage while eliminating the threat to friendly forces. But throughout the engagement, Donovan found himself processing what he had witnessed. Kai had communicated with enemy aircraft in a language he didn't recognize, using protocols that had immediately identified her as someone with authority over their operations. The implications were staggering and raised questions about loyalties, allegiances, and the true nature of the conflict they were fighting. As the last enemy position fell silent and the convoy resumed movement toward its destination, Donovan realized that the morning's mission had revealed truths that would complicate everything he thought he knew about warfare in Afghanistan. "Status report," he said quietly over the intercom, ostensibly referring to aircraft systems but really asking for an explanation of what he had just witnessed. "All systems green," Kai replied, her voice professionally neutral. "Mission accomplished." But they both knew that the real conversation was just beginning, and that some explanations would be more dangerous than the questions they were meant to answer. The flight back to base was conducted in relative silence, both crew members processing the morning's events and their implications. The convoy had reached its destination safely, casualties had been minimal, and the mission was officially considered a success. But for Donovan, the successful completion of their assigned objectives was overshadowed by the revelation that his crew chief possessed capabilities and connection that existed far outside the normal structure of military operations. As they approached Fob Seraph for landing, Kai finally broke the silence. "I know you have questions." "A few," Donovan replied, his tone carefully neutral. "Some of them I can answer, some of them I can't, and some of them," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "some of them you might not want to know the answers to." The Apache touched down on the tarmac with the gentle precision of a pilot who had performed the maneuver thousands of times. But as the engine spooled down and the rotor blades began their slow deceleration, both crew members knew that their professional relationship had been fundamentally altered by the morning's revelations. "Post-flight inspection," Kai said, returning to the familiar routines of aircraft maintenance. "Want to make sure everything held together during the engagement." But as she began her systematic examination of the aircraft systems, Donovan could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful way she avoided meeting his eyes directly. She was preparing herself for questions that might compromise operations she couldn't discuss, relationships she couldn't acknowledge, and a background that existed in the gray spaces between official policy and operational necessity. The minigun that had jammed the previous day was functioning perfectly, its ammunition feed mechanism operating with the precision of a Swiss watch. Kai's repair had held through sustained combat operations, validating her assessment and expertise. But the successful completion of her mechanical responsibilities only highlighted the larger questions about her other capabilities. "Clean as a whistle," she announced after completing her inspection, "ready for the next mission." "About that," Donovan said quietly, "about what happened up there with those aircraft." Kai straightened slowly, her expression shifting to the careful neutrality of someone preparing to navigate a potentially dangerous conversation. "What about it?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge, an acknowledgement that they were approaching topics that could have consequences far beyond their immediate relationship. In the distance, other aircraft were landing and taking off, the normal rhythm of military operations continuing around them like a reminder of the larger machine they were part of. But for Marcus Donovan and Kai Nakamura, the morning had revealed that some operations existed outside the normal chain of command. Some capabilities were never officially acknowledged, and some truths were more complex than the simple narratives of conventional warfare. As they walked toward the operations building for debriefing, Donovan realized that his understanding of the conflict in Afghanistan and his role in it was about to become significantly more complicated. The debriefing session was conducted by Major Patricia Reeves, a by-the-books intelligence officer who had never seen combat but understood the importance of accurate operational reporting. She took them through the standard questions: timeline, enemy capabilities, weapons effectiveness, friendly casualties, lessons learned, with the methodical thoroughness of someone creating a permanent record. The enemy demonstrated unusual tactical sophistication, Donovan reported, sticking to observable facts. Coordinated ground positions, advanced planning, possible foreign training or advisement. And the aerial component, Reeves asked, consulting her notes. Your report mentions unidentified aircraft that withdrew without engaging. This was the moment Donovan had been dreading, the point where official reporting would intersect with classified realities. He glanced briefly at Kai, who was sitting with the still composure of someone who had navigated similar briefings before. 3 aircraft, unknown type, approached from the north during the engagement, he said carefully. They maintained distance and eventually withdrew from the area without taking hostile action. Any idea why they withdrew? The question was perfectly reasonable from an intelligence perspective, but answering it honestly would reveal capabilities that Kai clearly wanted to keep classified. Donovan found himself forced to choose between complete honesty and protecting his crew chief's operational security. Possible that our presence deterred them from engaging, he said finally, or they may have been reconnaissance rather than attack elements. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either. Reeves accepted the explanation with a nod and moved on to other topics, but Donovan could see in Kai's eyes a flicker of gratitude that he had chosen discretion over complete transparency. The briefing concluded 20 minutes later with standard recommendations for future operations, and a note that the successful completion of the mission demonstrated the effectiveness of current tactics and equipment. It was the kind of sanitized summary that would be filed away and eventually forgotten, contributing nothing to the larger understanding of the complexities they had actually encountered. As they walked out of the operations building, Kai finally spoke. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not asking questions you knew I couldn't answer." They walked in silence for several minutes, both processing the implications of shared secrets and unspoken agreements. Finally, as they approached the maintenance hangar where the Apache was being prepared for its next mission, Donovan decided that some questions needed to be asked regardless of the consequences. "That tattoo on your wrist," he said quietly, "I know what it means." Kai stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Do you?" "Sealed trident, but not the standard version, something more specialized." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Something that officially doesn't exist." The admission hung between them like a confession, an acknowledgement that they had moved beyond the boundaries.